I wanna wake up in the morning where the orange blossoms grow, and the sun comes peeping in where I've been sleeping, and the songbirds say hello. I love the fresh air and the sunshine. It's good for us, you know. So I'll make my home in Florida where the orange blossoms grow.
All right.
Hello there. I'm fortunate to be a part of the Palm Harbor Historical Museum's wonderful oral history, and my name is Sally Parks. But I have someone here that's from down the road, so to speak, and her name is BonSue Brandvik, and she is an author and expert on the Bellevue Biltmore. Maybe you don't want to call yourself an expert. What would you like to call yourself, Bon?
Actually, I am an avid fan of local history, and because with my books, I just needed to do a lot of research, and because I'm writing a series of books, I needed to keep track of that research. So it started being where first I started writing a event timeline having to do with the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel, and then researching the owners and who did what. And then just over time, it developed step by step. Back when I first started writing, well, let's go back to why did I write these books?
Right,
and,
I'd like to know that.
And actually, it started.
And they're all sitting right here. Yeah. And Pearls was your first one.
And then Ripples and Redemption. These are all part of the Spirits of the Bellevue Biltmore series. There will be one more book that I'm writing right now. That'll be called Nails. But the way these came about was back in 2005 when somebody else wanted to demolish the hotel. I was really fascinated with the hotel. I loved it. I had been there for events, weddings, and the gorgeous Mother's Day brunch that they always had there, all that kind of thing. But I really didn't know about the hotel itself. And so I decided to take a private tour. And I toured the hotel all by myself and went from room to room, just admiring everything. And
did you ask if you could do that, or you just?
No, I just did it. I got kicked out of the Bellevue Biltmore several times for being in places I shouldn't have been. But I did become very familiar with the hotel. And what was really overpowering to me is when walking alone and going into all those spaces, you could almost feel, it was like the sense of history permeated the air, and you can just feel it coming in. So I was walking through, and I decided, when I saw the little telephone booths that they had.
Yes, right.
And so
I forgot about them. I'm glad you mentioned that.
I said, how long had these been here? And so I started doing a little research on that. And I was standing there and realized that one of them was put in just in the 20s when pay telephones became a thing, right? Wow. So they got a phone booth. The two other booths were added when the military occupied the hotel during World War II.
I never knew that piece.
Yeah, and so that's how the hotel. So I just was standing there thinking about how everybody had changed the hotel, not just the structure, adding phone booths, but had left a little piece of themselves. And there is, as I started talking to other historic hotel buffs, so to speak, we all realized that what we believe is that people leave echoes of themselves in a place, especially when they're really attached to that building. And I could feel hundreds of echoes there. And that old saying ran through my mind, if only these walls could talk, the stories they would tell, right? Yes. And that's when it dawned on me, I could write their stories. And so I originally started to write one book that would be about the whole history of the hotel. And I quickly realized that there's just so much there that I wound up boiling it down into 4 periods of time. And what happens in each one of the books is that somebody will check in the present, and the present being around 2015, that time period. And so around that time, somebody checks into the hotel, they've got major problems going on in their life. Those problems resonate with spirits that reside at the hotel. The spirits take them back in time while the guest is asleep and shows them memories from their period of time. And the memories are very accurate. Again, I did a lot of research to make sure that could have happened. Not that it did happen, but it
Right,
could have
right.
happened. And then they learn lessons from the past that carry over to the present, and they're still relevant over time. And so,
And I love it when some of the characters say, well, I thought I was awake, but then I had this happen, and maybe I was just,
yeah, they all think they're dreaming. At first
Right,
you wake
exactly,
up and
exactly.
wow, that's the most vivid dream. And it's like, but I can remember every moment of it. And so they slowly start putting it together. And in each book, then somebody new checks in. They have totally different problems. Those problems resonate with a different set of spirits. So that way I can cover the time period of when the hotel first opened, during the Prohibition era, when the hotel and its railroad was used to smuggle alcohol, and they had a not-so-secret speakeasy inside. And then Redemption in the war years, when the hotel was commandeered by the Army, as all the big hotels were in this area at that time. And then the fourth book will be the pioneer phase. So we'll go back to here when the hotel is actually being built, and in the present day story of that one, because I can't have anybody check into the hotel because it's being demolished. So I have, in this last book I'm writing, I have a homeless person who is working on the demolition crew and living in the basement of the hotel unknown to anybody. So,
speaking of the basement of the hotel, you've been there.
oh yes.
Tell me about what it's like.
I've photographed a lot of that, and that was the most interesting thing, because people don't realize how much Henry Plant was a visionary at the time. But when he built that hotel, he built the whole basement, which had all the work areas. The bakery was down there. They had a giant ice keep, which looks kind of like an indoor swimming pool, and it was open to the delivery area right by the trains, so the trains could pull up. The blocks of ice could be slid down a ramp right into the ice keep, where they would be broken and taken up in small pieces upstairs to the ice boxes in the refrigerators upstairs, or in the ice boxes rather. And so they had that. They had the laundry was over on one side, so you can imagine sheets and towels and just lines and lines of clothes drying down there and being ironed down there. They had a dress shop, because back then the ladies, there was a ball usually every week, and you can't go in the same old thing.
Absolutely not.
So they had a dressmaker in the basement. They also had, that's where the men's club was, which was later named St. Andrews. That was the men's card room. They could go in and talk, smoke cigars, talk about the events of the day.
Wasn't there a baggage area where they unloaded the baggage from the trains?
Yeah, and that was all the thing too. Right by where they had the ice keep sliding down that ramp, they had another entrance, and it was they had railroad tracks all the way through the tunnels of the basement, which were extensive.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they had railroad tracks all the way through, and they had one of those hand carts, so you could put all the luggage on there and pump it to the nearest servant's staircase, so that they could carry up linens and luggage and everything without having to go as far as
Sure.
the whole length of the
Right,
hotel.
right.
It was absolutely a fascinating basement area, and it was the forerunner of. They say Walt Disney was a genius, that he built everything underground, but he wasn't the first one. Henry Plant was. And the whole reason he could have a basement, this is Florida, basements are quite rare.
Correct.
And the reason that he could have a basement was that we are on a bluff. Now, that's not by coincidence either. Henry Plant had, for 7 years, had his surveyors out there after he had built he built the Tampa Hotel, because he had also built the Port of Tampa. I don't know if you knew that part, but
I did know that, actually.
But yeah, so he had built that, and he found that the hotel is built on the highest coastal bluff in all of Florida. Wow. Pinellas County gets more days of sunshine than any other part of Florida, which amazed me. I thought it would be Miami, but it's not. It's Pinellas County. And so then he decided to build what he called his Swiss chalet, and where the Tampa Hotel had been more of a Moorish design.
Yes.
And so this was a Swiss chalet.
Oh, okay.
And so he built this one, and he built railroad tracks right up to the door. He had a rail yard, so you could go from that time. He had tracks where he had built railroad tracks where you could go from New York all the way to this hotel without having to change trains even one time. And when you got here, because people would winter was a verb back then, you would winter someplace.
Yes.
And but you could winter there and put your Pullman card in the rail yard, and then they could pull it out if you wanted to take a short trip, like to St. Petersburg for a few days or whatever, but then your suite of rooms. And then after Henry Plant died, just a few years after the hotel was open, and there was a big cabal because he had written a new will. He knew that his son Morton was really only interested in the hotel and golf, and he really wasn't interested in the shipping side of the business. Well, Henry Plant had ever since he came to Florida, which he came to Florida because his first wife was suffering from tuberculosis. It's the same thing that brought Henry Flagler to Florida, was because his wife was suffering from tuberculosis. And so they had come here and they had competed, and because there was nothing else. You come from New York in that environment of where there were transportation magnates and there all this kind of stuff, and now they get here and there's nothing. So they started competing.
But it's like a fresh, I don't know, painting
like a canvas,
to start.
Yeah,
A canvas.
Yeah, it could be, except that when you're from New York, you want all the rich people to come. Well, camping then was how you came to Florida. They had tents that were, sometimes on platforms, sometimes on the
cheeky
ground.
huts and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, little things,
right.
and that's not going to draw people from their mansions in New York, right?
Right.
So what they first were competing, Henry Flagler and Henry Plant, were competing with the railroads, where Henry Plant wanted to take his up through the center of the state and connect all the way down to his port, which he did. Flagler wanted to take the whole coast.
The East Coast.
Yeah, and he built the railroad out all the way to the Keys, which he did. But they quickly realized that the rich people still wouldn't come because there were no hotels that met their expectations. So they started competing on their hotels. And actually, there's a kind of funny story about that, is that after Flagler had built one of his main hotels in St. Augustine. And then Henry Plant built the Tampa Hotel, and when it was to compete with it, and so whenever he was getting ready, because they had this friendly rivalry, he took an entire page ad to invite Henry Flagler to attend and see what a real hotel looks like.
Oh my gosh,
and
that's
so he
rubbing it
invited
in,
him
isn't
to
it?
Tampa. Well, Henry Flagler responded with a full page ad of his own that said, "Where's Tampa?" And then Henry Plant did another full page ad, and it was just follow the crowds.
Oh,
So
adorable.
they had that kind of relationship.
Touche.
So then that's how the famous, and that's why each hotel had to outdo each other, and so they built this one to outdo, and this one was built where Henry Plant said, okay, well, once they're, basically, was one of the first people to put restaurants inside of his hotels. We think of that as being so normal, but it wasn't at the time. And once they're bed and fed, they need something to do. So he arranged balls and concerts and boat trips and hunting excursions. And he had museums on his property, and he had just all kinds of activities that you could do, including golf. And so that's
the golf course came early with the hotel?
Yeah, it was 6 holes when it first opened. Oh. And Chauncey Servos built that one. And then over time, then Henry Plant died a few years after the hotel was open. Morton then was able to sell off a lot of the properties and everything. I had mentioned that Henry Plant tried to give everything to his 4-year-old grandson, because he knew that his son and his wife were going to
sort of exploit the property.
They would tear it apart. And he wanted his legacy to outshine Flagler's forever, And so, but he had written that secret will and had it documented and everything, but he had done it in Connecticut. And he lived in New York. So it was invalid.
Wasn't honored.
Right. And so they broke it up, and sure enough, his wife Margaret, his second wife Margaret, and his son Morton did exactly what he was afraid of. They dismantled it, sold off all the railroads, or most of the railroads, and then he got very much into golf and started bringing down on the remaining railroad. He started bringing down all this dirt from Indiana and everything, and that's why we have the very first golf club with green grass greens in Florida is at the Belleview Biltmore.
I didn't know that. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, because they all used on crushed rocks.
Right. So
Which-
say it again. It was because they brought down
The dirt from
The
Indiana,
dirt from
and they brought
Indiana.
a train, just train car after train car of dirt and
And
put it on there. And he
sod.
experimented. Actually, Morton experimented for 10 years to find a grass that would grow in Florida with the heat and the that kind of stuff. So yes, so that was that first golf club.
Wow.
And
when
he
when
expanded
did they
it to
have the
two.
little space over on Sand Key? When was that built? It
Oh, that
kind
was
of the-
actually not built until in the 50s. Or,
Yeah, I
or
thought
the
it would be
40s,
much
rather.
later, right,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
because that's when it was purchased again by the group, starts with a P. But anyway, so that's when they had that group had bought it, and he got a boat, and he would just shuttle people back and forth to the beach. Because remember, when the hotel was built, the beach was someplace you would go by boat, and you would walk the shore and collect shells maybe, but you're wearing long dresses. The whole idea of getting sun on your face was not ideal. They stayed away from that. Maisie Plant, who was Morton's second wife, they each had two wives, and Morton's second wife, Maisie, was the one who actually got into building the swimming pool and doing all that. She was only married to Morton for 4 years before he died in 1919. But there's an interesting little, everything about this hotel is like, oh, let me tell you this story and let me tell you that
Well, that's
story.
good. I love stories.
But,
and so do our listeners love stories.
well, when Morton met Maisie, he met her within a few months of his first wife dying, and he had been married to her for 23 years. And so within a year, he met Maisie at a party, and she was quite stunning, apparently. I've seen her pictures, and I'm like, okay, but she was stunning.
It was a different day.
Yeah, it was. And so what they did with Maisie is she was married. She was married, and she had a son, Philip. And so Morton had to have her, and he paid her husband $8 million in that
Oh
money
my goodness.
to divorce her and allow him to adopt her son, Philip.
Was this in the 20s or?
No, he
early?
died in 1919.
Okay.
So this would have been
So-
1914 when all this
oh my
happened.
goodness.
Yeah, so she divorced, her husband divorced her and made it look like it was all, he was the rat, she was innocent, she was wonderful, and he adopted her son. All right, 4 years later, when we had a huge influenza epidemic, it took out thousands of people throughout the United States. And he died as part of that influenza epidemic in 1919.
Morton died?
did.
Oh.
And so they had been married for 4 years, but it was a critical 4 years in that some of the laws had changed. So by that time, the wife then inherited the lion's share. She inherited 70% of Morton's assets.
Wow.
And
Which were considerable, I guess.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
if he could
Margaret had
dish out
only-
$8 million for his wife, I
Yeah,
guess
well,
he had
Margaret,
plenty.
Henry's wife had only gotten 30%, and Morton had gotten 70. So now it reversed, and then the wife gets 70,
Right.
and the 30% went to his offspring, which now included Philip and Henry. So Henry, who was supposed to get everything, winds up with 15% of what was left of his father's estate. So
Philip was the basically
adopted
stepson
son.
or
Yeah.
adopted son.
Yeah, he was the adopted son, and he was a playboy, and he had a wonderful but short life. He married like 3 or 4 different actresses, and he died on safari. I mean, so he was just a playboy. And but anyway, so I forget what we had gone to, but each part of the hotel's history, it was such an influential building. And the more I learned about the hotel, the more I wanted to share that. And so I I had started back in, after I said it, so I could tell their stories. Well, that is when 2005, we thought we had saved the hotel. There was a historic preservation ordinance put in, and then in 2009, the Legg Mason Company bought it, and they closed it for a renovation, which, by the way, I was the very last person to ever check out of the hotel by design.
Really?
Because I was planning to write these books, and when they reopened, they were going to sell the books in the gift shop and all that kind of stuff. And so it turns out that I am the last person to ever check out of the hotel.
Wow.
Because then, unfortunately, the renovation got started. They ripped out all the carpets, ripped down the wallpaper, sold off all the things that were not historic, stored all the historic items in the basement. And they were planning to make the top floor, which was short, they were going, which I'll tell you about why that was in a minute, but they were going to raise the roof, so they didn't worry about repairing some damage to the roof. And then a couple lawsuits got filed against the town because they said that we had approved a couple variance requests, and I was chairman of the Planning and Zoning Board at the time, and I know that the variance
For the town of Bel Air.
Yeah, and the variance requests were fine, and we didn't break any rules or anything, but they were challenging the decisions in court.
Right.
And so the owner said, well, we're not going to continue with the renovation unless we're sure we can do what we want to do. And it stalled out for 2 years, and it was a very bad 2 years because what we thought was the real estate bubble, breaking. At first we didn't understand the ramifications that was going to have on the entire financial market. And then we entered what's gotten to be known as the Great Recession.
Right.
Which lasted much longer than anybody thought. And unfortunately, the owners who had planned the renovation were captivated by the whole situation, and they were held out by their financiers, and they all pulled their funding because they were so worried about spending any kind of money. And it was going to be an expensive renovation.
Right.
Well over $100 million to renovate the building.
Wow.
So anyway, the hotel sat, and so my plans changed from writing stories about the Bellevue and sharing on my website was sharing this renovation experience with them to all of a sudden trying to save the Bellevue Biltmore again. And again, we thought it was protected by the historic ordinance, but it was a matter of finding somebody to repair it before the roof and everything got to be more damaged and all that.
Deteriorating, because an old building like that does just
that was mostly a fallacy that it would deteriorate. That hotel is built out of the southern loblolly pine, the heart of the southern loblolly pine, which is a very special wood. It's so special that we almost took it to extinction in Florida, and now it's a protected species of wood here.
I've lived here for a long time, and I've never heard of, I've heard of pine, obviously.
The
but
southern
not the
loblolly pine is so famous because once that tree gets to be about 40 years old, the inside of the tree is so dense with sap, not even termites can penetrate it.
Wow.
And of course, what happens to sap over time? It hardens, right? So the majority of the Bellevue Biltmore, and all of its bones and everything, which is the primary part of the structure, it's the same as if it were stone. You can't, it's not going to be going anywhere. And again, I took thousands and thousands of pictures. I've been up in the attic taking pictures of the beams. I've taken pictures of the water damage and all that. The water doesn't do anything. Those beams could soak under a river for 100 years. You pull them out and they're going to be fine. So a little water damage is certainly not going to hurt them. But the appearance of it, and what happened was they started putting out information that was skewed, trying to get people on the side of let's demolish it. And there were a lot of people who don't care about historic hotels. They would much rather have new things. And so so it got to be a nasty battle for years. And then the Kawa brothers from Miami bought it, and they got it for the $8 million left on the note, which was...
No kidding.
Yeah.
They bought it for $8 million?
$8 million, yes. And they immediately
Amazing.
divided the property into 3 pieces, which would be the Cabana Club, on the Indian Rocks property on the beach, and then it would be the golf course, the two golf courses separate, and then the hotel
building
itself.
So, BonSue, tell me a little bit about this kind of attic or upper part of the hotel.
Oh, the attic,
because I've never been in there.
All right, well, let me tell you, the hotel has the 4 or 5 floors, depending on which area you're in, and then the attic above that. And so what's really interesting that I had found out was, first of all, that the higher you were in the hotel back when this hotel was built, the less valuable the rooms were.
Oh.
And when you think about it, they didn't have elevators. You were walking up and down stairs in a ball gown. So of course the higher floors were much less valuable. As a matter of fact, the 5th floor wasn't even deemed suitable for guests to pay and everything. So that's where the nannies and the servants traveling with the guests, that's where they would stay, up in the 5th floor. And so they got the most beautiful view, but the ceilings were much lower. In some places because it was, the gables and everything ran down the gabled roof, and so in some places it was only like 5 foot ceilings back there. Most of them were around 7 feet.
Under the
8
eaves,
feet,
so to speak.
Exactly. So it was very low, the ceilings there. And then the attic above that, there's so much to see. Because you can just climb up there, and of course with my imagination it's like I'm up there saying, how long has it been since somebody's been up here oiling this wheel for the lift, because originally they had a pulley style lift in the basement, and that wheel is still in the attic. And the wheel is still in the basement, the big wheel in the bottom and a smaller wheel at the top.
Right.
And so how long has it been since they used to shove newspapers in between the beams for insulation? Because it was only open for the winter, of course.
Right.
And it was just fascinating attic. But what really I loved about the attic, and this is what all my pictures show, is the beams looks like somebody put them in yesterday.
Really?
Zero damage, zero damage to anything, not even the small boards that were nailed to hold on to the plaster, which is called lath. The lath boards, everything is perfect. And so it's like anything that they showed as far as pictures of how much the hotel was damaged was just baloney. Because when the hotel was built, of course, as we come down into those rooms, the 5th floor rooms were used as offices in later years by staff. And it's interesting because some of the rooms were not used because they were known to be haunted. And so that pulls you into the ghost part, which this is an important part. I had never meant to write about the hotel being haunted. I didn't believe the hotel was haunted when I first started writing the books. I was using spirits. And in my books, by the way, spirits are different than ghosts.
Right, of course.
In my book, there is a lighted path, and I don't want to ever mess with anybody's beliefs and what they think happens to you after you die. I ask them to believe that there is a spot in between the world of the living and that lighted path, which I call the spirit realm. And that you can, when you die, your spirit can step off that path, that lighted path, and stay in the spirit realm as long as they choose to. What the difference for me between ghosts and spirits is a ghost is formed when a spirit is headed for the lighted path, and a part of it, usually the evil part that's afraid to be judged, tears off from the spirit and stays in the spirit realm.
Okay.
And so for me, a spirit is the specter, the mean, the kind of thing. Where a spirit is just like you and I, just without a body, has all your memories. The difference with a spirit is that they have recollection of everything. They've got eidetic memory of every single moment of everything, and they cannot rationalize any longer. They see exactly what they did. And so some of them stay for a while. They all have different reasons for being in the spirit realm. And but that was just, like I said, that was for me just an object to tell the history of this hotel.
Right.
And I've always believed women have learned important lessons for decade after decade. And if we would only stop and listen, we don't have to keep learning For instance, Margaret Plant, who is the only character, the hotel and Margaret Plant are the only character that go between all the books of the stories.
Okay.
And Margaret Plant I used because when I started researching it, the second wife of Henry Plant was so far ahead of her time. She was quite the woman and everything. And so I make her be the wise, grandmotherly kind of woman who can impart wisdom if you would just listen and apply it.
True matriarch.
Yeah, to apply that wisdom to your life today. And so that was the basis of my stories. Well, when I started writing Pearls, like I said, I set up a website, and my website at that time was Spirits of the Bellevue Biltmore, and everybody learned I was telling this and that it was going to have spirits. So I started getting emails from all around the world from people who were asking if the ghost that they saw while they were at the hotel was going to be in my books. And I was like, I was amused by it, and I thought, old hotels, they creak, they moan, they whatever,
Right.
and the ambiance is there, and people are just misunderstanding. And that's how I went for quite a while, actually. And then when the hotel was obviously it was going to be in trouble, I left my agent because it would have taken another couple of years to get Pearls out onto the market, because the publishing industry works at the speed of molasses in winter, right?
I've heard that, yes.
So I decided to go on and publish Pearls, and my agent rightfully said, if you publish that book, you're on your own for all of it, because they won't pick up a series, they won't pick up a self-published novel. I was going to publish Pearls, and when that went out, then that became more popular, and people started sending more emails. And all of a sudden I was reading the email one day, and I was like, wait, I've heard this story before. And I went back and I searched my saved emails and discovered that yes, somebody had seen had the exact same experience. They didn't know each other, they were in different years, they were from different locations, but they had both seen a little boy. And he was dressed in, both of their things said that he was dressed in 1930s clothing with the little newspaper boy hat and the
knickers kind of thing.
Yeah, and all that. And both stories said that he drowned in the pool, and both stories said that he was looking for his family. And then I said, well, that's really odd. And then I went in and I started comparing other stories. And to date, I have 20 what I call real ghosts of the Bellevue Biltmore. And that is 20 different encounters that people have reported to me at least 2 times, and some as many as 8 or 9 times.
Wow.
The exact same ghost. And this isn't orbs, which are, the dots on pictures that some people claim or spirits caught on film. It is where either a full body apparition or something came about to where it made a lasting impression and enough details that I can sort it out from the others.
Wow.
So I decided to start including those stories in the second book, where they talk about some of the stories of the Bellevue Biltmore. And they say that this, I've had so many reports of children heard in the halls running and playing in the hallways.
Right.
And yet,
I've heard that
there's
too.
not one time that they've opened the door and found any children there. Security says they can hear it. They walk around a corner. It stops. It's just gone. There is one of my favorites where a Victorian couple, you all of a sudden hear Victorian music playing on like a Victrola kind of music. And they go into one of the ballrooms and they see there's a couple dancing there. And these ones are, people will see it for up to a minute, seeing these spirits dancing, and they fade out towards the bottom, no feet, no anything, but they're dancing, and then the music fades and they fade away. And so that really started me to the point that I was like, okay, so the hotel is haunted. And now I'm a public speaker, so one of the presentations I do is called The 20 Real Ghosts of the Bellevue Biltmore.
That would be wonderful to hear that sometime.
And then in Redemption, I actually decided to take one of the ghost stories and use it and say, how did that ghost become a ghost in that? So I've taken a real ghost. I have no idea how he really got there, but I will tell you how in my book it happens. And that brings us back to the point of how do what I do is I play in the gray area. So any of the history that you read in these books, any of the description of the hotel, all of that is going to be 100% accurate. Every now and then I'll take a very small piece of literary license, like when I was writing this in World War II, there became a proclamation where if you only have one living son, that living son could not participate in battle. It was the basis of the movie Saving Private Ryan.
Right.
Okay, that needed to happen 1 year earlier than it actually happened for it to take place in my book. So I take literary license with just that kind of thing.
Right.
However, almost every detail in my books, when it talks about the history of what was the hotel used for during World War II, how was it used, and all that kind of stuff.
And I want to talk about that in a minute, but first of all, I just want to ask you, do you think of your books as historic novels then?
Yeah, they're actually what is defined as cross-genre novels. So they are historic / paranormal because they do involve the spirit. So they're historic, paranormal, and there's elements of time travel. There's elements of romance. Obviously, each book involves a romance in the present and in the past. So they carry a lot, and they're mysteries because you have to solve what is happening.
Right.
Why are they approaching me? What am I supposed to learn from the spirits? So they're a cross-genre section that actually my thing is I hope that they reach out to everybody. And there is
I think they do. They're very appealing to read, very readable, and
thank you.
Because many of us that know about the Belleview built more love the context of the story, but the stories are good too. So that's nice.
And the present day stories are fun because I make it take place in our town, and so they will go to a Frenchie's restaurant and stuff. And so I hear from people that sometimes it's like, oh, I've been there. Oh, yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah, I know that place. That kind of thing. And but they are complicated, and I don't like any book where you know what's going to happen at the end, and I like to say you don't know what's going to happen except for one thing: good will win over evil in every one of my books, because I never like walking out of a movie theater feeling worse than when I went in, and I don't want anybody to close one of my books feeling worse or saying, why didn't you do this or whatever.
Do you know how your book is going to end when you start writing it?
I know. Basically, yes. I am what's called a pantser. There are two types of writers. One is called a plotter. They outline the whole book, outline every scene, every act, and then they sit down and write the book. I am too spontaneous for that, and if I were to do that, I would be bored with the book.
It would be very labor intensive.
Yeah, I would be so bored. I wrote that book already, and so now I need to tell a different story. So a pantser is somebody who sits down and they have a general idea of where they're going with the story. But the story I'm writing right now, I have two characters that I thought were just going to be just a page or two, and they've turned out to be major characters. And so I have no idea that was going to happen.
Take on a life of their own.
And I have an idea of what's going to happen with other people, and I involve local people in the books sometimes.
That's what I was going to ask you, is do you kind of identify some people that might be good characters in your book? Yeah,
and that's for one of them we had a tour guide of the hotel, and in this they have to take a tour, so I use her. That's Sharon Delahante. I don't know if you know her, but she was the longtime historian of the hotel, and she gave a lot of the tours. And so I put her in the book, and first ask, of course, if she would mind. And the book I'm writing right now, I need a collection of people who are not going to be what they really are in life. And so, but I said, would you mind? You want me to use your book? You want to be part of it? And almost everybody wants to.
Sure.
In this one, I needed some characters to attend an art auction, and I said, okay. And I wrote on my website, next 5 people to comment on the book, are going to be in the book. And so then I used their names and their little bit of their story. You know, their if they're married, I used their husbands and them, and they got to be attending the art auction. And so I have fun with that.
Sure. That's nice. That feels like you're also inclusive in the community.
Well, and the one that I'm writing right now is some of the security guards that are, you know, the RPD is the residential planned area that everything that where the Belleview Biltmore was, that's all the RPD. And some of the security guards, I found out who was there in 2015 because that's the book I'm writing right now. And those guards are going to be in the book, and they were, you know, they're always, you know, have fun, and they're like, yeah, definitely put me in there. And,
So, so you've talked about how you develop some of the characters from people that are known, and some are, I'm sure, are sort of imaginary. And you start writing, and what is the most difficult thing about writing a book?
I think for writers, that's a different question for them. You know, it's sort of like, you know, what is your talent? You know, that kind of thing. It's like, well, what's the best thing for you might not be anything for me. And I didn't realize that storytelling was a talent. I thought everybody could do this because I was raised, you know, we were a poor family, and for us it was, you know, a cardboard box one day was a rocket ship, and the next day it was the kitchen,
a puppet show or whatever.
Thing, or it was whatever. And so I was raised to use a lot of imagination, and I thought everybody could do that. And when everybody says, "How do you think of all these things in your books?" and I was like, and
doesn't everyone?
I just thought that was. I thought that was a talent, just like singing. I mean, I can't carry a tune in a bucket, so you know, I thought it was I've learned that it's a skill, a talent like that.
It is.
And so what I do is I when I'm writing my story, like I said, I know basically what's going to happen, and I know that I want a couple chapters in the present and then a couple chapters in the past, and I go back and forth between the story, so that, you know, I keep them linked. And I have to figure out what all does the present day protagonist have to learn from the protagonist in the past. So each of my books winds up being, actually you get two books in one. Because you get a story from the past, you get a story in the present, and then how are they linked together.
But that's the difficult part, is keeping
for
them
me,
linked.
For me it's that. It's like making sure that they link. I can't have something happening in the past that doesn't matter in the present.
Right.
And I can't have something happen in the present that has nothing to do with the spirits, you know. So that's probably the hardest part for me, is linking the stories together in a cohesive manner that makes sense, but is also like, oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Why didn't I see that? Yeah,
sure.
And one of the most fun parts about that is that I'm writing them to entertain and to teach about the history and to, like I said, get the women thinking about lessons from the past. But I've had some people who say, this changed my life. Or, you know, in this book, she loses a child. And I've had mothers come to me who have lost their child, and they're like, this is dead on. This is exactly what it feels like.
It's real.
And it's given me hope, you know, for, and all that. And so that's very exciting to have.
Talk a little bit about the Second World War and the use of the hotel for
it was
military.
Used, it was used as barracks for the military and as a training facility.
And what was the years of that?
That would be 1943, 44. So they were only there about 18 months. They did a lot in that 18 months. Is leading up to that, remember, all the men were going to war and women didn't travel on their own. So the big hotels were really suffering anyway. So the government needed buildings, and they started conscripting buildings for use in whatever they needed. And they took all of our major hotels around here. At the time, it was the Moss Inn on Fort Harrison, the Fort Harrison itself, and the Bellevue Biltmore. As well as the ones in St. Petersburg, the Don Cesar, and the so you've got all those hotels were being used by the military. and this is Florida, so it was a wonderful place for people to recuperate. So people would come here from everything from shell shock to, amputated limbs to reconstructive surgery. They would bring all of those patients to some of the places. Well, our hotel, the Belleview Biltmore, was used to train pilots. We were going through pilots like running water. People don't realize how many pilots were dying every single day, to the point that they lowered their standards to where they started requiring a high school education. They preferred that you had some pilot experience before you came in, but it could be a crop duster or anything like that. And just
you flew in a plane once.
Exactly, and so they started training the pilots, and they were just sending them through these training courses and getting them out. And we had the use of plane. Oh, and then had two airfields, Drew Airfield and MacDill Airfield, and those obviously became MacDill Air Force Base and Tampa International Airport. But at the time, they were just Drew Airfield, and we were using the B-26 bomber. And this is one of the only places that were training pilots to fly that, which was called the Flying Coffin. It had a lot of different, wonderful names like that. It was a bomber, and once it was in the air, it was a wonderful bomber. It could take a lot of flak without going down and all that, but to take off, it had such short wings that if you didn't reach a certain exact speed and angle, you crashed. To the point that there was a saying, one a day into Tampa Bay. And because they would lose planes, that some of them could be towed to shore, other ones sank and couldn't be recovered. But that plane was going through, so we were training pilots to fly pretty much that plane. So they did a lot of their coursework in the hotel, which they can't have a fancy hotel like this. So they removed all the objects from inside the hotel, put them in storage units on the hotel's grounds, and they took all the furniture and they took that it was owned by Kirkby during these, he and his wife were the most congenial hosts from coast to coast, the Kirkbys. So they sold off or used all the furnishings and everything in their other hotels because the Army wanted Army cots, and they wanted everything to look like. They took down all the beautiful chandeliers and all the gorgeous furniture, and they stored it in these buildings, all the fancy mirrors, and they made it into a barracks. We were worried about light escaping because on the water we were worried about submarines coming up and using the lights to target things, which we since learned that that never really happened. They didn't really target lights. They used maps when they were flying at nighttime, and they used coordinates. They didn't ever do that. But America bought into it, and we painted all the windows black, closed the curtains at night. In the hotel, that was thousands of windows that all were painted black.
Wow, I didn't know that.
They got carried away, and this was where they said it was part busy work and part trying to make it look like military. Even some of the glass windows inside, which were Tiffany glass windows, were painted, slathered in black paint on both sides of the windows inside the building. All the walls were painted a drab army green. The front area was, the lobby area that we know of, well, that was used to process people in and out, so you can picture desk after desk after desk with men sitting behind them with typewriters and processing.
And that beautiful kind of rotunda area that you used to walk into must have looked very different.
Very different.
During military time.
And then the room that was behind the original registration desk was used by the Bellevue Biltmore as the telegraph office and the manager's office and all that. Well, that became the telegraph for the military. And so they would have all their messages, and so people would come, and the door was one of those Dutch doors, so they built a table across the top of the half
door,
so that they could do business with people without going in the room where the telegraph offices were being done.
I have to ask you, what year was AC involved? Do you know?
Well, AC really didn't come into play until the hotel started opening year-round.
Okay.
Which wasn't until the 80s.
Oh, okay. It was
and
that
even
late.
then, even then they put air conditioning into the window units.
Uh-huh.
They didn't,
That's right. I forgot. You could see those sticking out of the window.
Yeah. And so they each room had, and when the hotel was built, some of the rooms had private bathrooms, but most of them had semi-private bathrooms. So you would have your hotel room and another hotel room. A hallway connected you with the bathrooms, and you would share with your neighbor. And of course, over time, we didn't want to do that anymore.
Right.
So when that happened, they started selling 2 rooms as a suite of rooms, or a suite, and then one they would make your bedroom and one a parlor with your bathroom in between. With the redesign, they were going to tear those out, make all the rooms a little bit smaller, but with their own bathrooms. And so that was going to be done.
Tell me the various names, or was it always just the Bellevue Biltmore, and how did
No,
it get its name? And then I think it was called the Queen of the Gulf or something like that?
Okay,
Am I
those are
right?
good questions. Yes, it has had a lot of owners and it has had a few names. It was built as the Hotel Bellevue.
Oh, okay.
And the Hotel Bellevue was given its name by Henry Plant, and it was because of the beautiful view, Bellevue. The town that he planned around it, as in a wagon wheel type around the hotel, was Bellevue Heights. And, and then that became, it was Bel Air Heights.
Bel Air Heights,
And then, because Bell, beautiful air. Remember that at that time, tuberculosis was a major thing.
Absolutely.
So the idea that you've got beautiful air and beautiful views, that's what where the hotel got its original name. Then in 1920, John McKenty Bowman bought the hotel and he added it to his Biltmore chain. Now, the Biltmore chain got its name because John McKenty Bowman wanted to, when you think of his hotels, you picture mansions. And at that time, what would be in the mansion would be the Biltmore Estate, which was the summer home for the Vanderbilt family that was in North Carolina. So he wrote to them and asked if they would mind if he used Biltmore as the name for his hotel chain, and the Vanderbilt family gave him that permission. So he had, all over the world, magnificent hotels in his Biltmore chain. Only 5 hotels in his entire chain were added to the chain. Most of them didn't meet his standards, but the Bellevue Biltmore did. So when he bought it, Morton Plant had added a wing in 1904. It's called the East Wing.
Morton Plant Hospital now you're talking about.
Morton Plant, the Sun.
Oh, the Sun, I'm sorry.
And so he had built a wing on the east end of the building. The wing actually faced north, and everybody's like, why is it called the East Wing when it faces north? It was built at the east side of the building, which was an east-west facing building. So, so that's the East Wing, and he built that in 1904. When Bowman got the property in 1919 after Henry died, okay, now you're talking the Roaring 20s, right?
Right.
So he built another wing in 1924, which was the South Wing. And the South Wing was the only wing in the whole property that actually had some oak wood used in the building instead of all southern loblolly pine. Anyway, so he had built that part. When the hotel was, actually, I'm going to skip ahead now to when it's ready to be demolition. That's why they took so many pictures of the South Wing, because the South Wing had more deterioration, and they could show termite damage, they could show all this kind of stuff, and they never filmed the other part, and so they were able to kind of convince people that this is what the whole hotel looked like, when that was just a fallacy.
Oh, BonSue, you just have a wealth of information. So a little bit of the hotel was saved. I mean, I don't know.
And
that,
actually, I take pride in that. Again, I was the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Board for the town of Bel Air. When they came across, and there was a hard battle being fought with the preservationists, and there were a lot of people working very hard to try and save it. Everybody had their ideas, but what they didn't have was money. And unfortunately, developers have money, and they spent a lot of money. And they would say, like here, this is pictures of the deterioration. And my grandmother used to say something that, you know, the truth is a lie if it's not the whole truth. Okay, and so that's basically what they did. Was they showed a lot of pictures of deterioration without any kind of context. They showed patches of the holes in walls or ceilings without saying, oh yeah, but they knocked those holes in walls and the ceilings when they started the renovation because they wanted to check the subsurface walls and they wanted to see what was below it. So those weren't like the whole hotel falling apart. They had knocked those holes in there. There was a lot to do about the leaking roof. And the leaking roof, what they never mentioned was that the hotel didn't have eaves until the 1970s when they decided to coat all the southern pine in with aluminum siding. At that point, instead of having the chains to drain water, which the hotel had always had, they added eaves made out of oak. And so the eaves were, and they had suffered hurricane damage, and they were really bad, and they had holes, but everything beyond that was just fine. But they didn't ever mention that. So when when it came time to where we were being faced with the idea that they bought it, but they were going to buy it, but only if they could tear down the whole hotel. And of course, we were fighting it tooth and nail and trying to bring lawsuits. And you know, you're going to be talking to other guests that'll cover that part a lot more thoroughly than I can. But they did an inspection, and now I've since gotten to know the person who did the inspection, and they inspected the hotel, not counting the full basement, was 820,000 square feet.
Wow.
Okay, now that does include the new lobby and the new parts, but it was 820,000 square feet. The inspector inspected the property for about 1 hour and 45 minutes, including the basement and everything, and after that came up with the context that 57% of the building could not be salvaged. Now, why was that important? Because the ordinance said that as long as 50% or more of the building could be salvaged, you may not demolish the hotel. So they had to get around that historic preservation ordinance, and that's the way they did it.
And may have been an arbitrary number because they
absolutely. I mean, how do you inspect 820,000 square feet plus the full basement plus all the, and come up with a precise number that's just over what can't be salvaged. So yeah, it was baloney, but we didn't have money to hire our own inspector. We didn't own the property, and so we couldn't have it
even
inspected.
Access it.
And so everything had to be done. So so it was determined that they were trying to buy it, but only if they could demolish the whole hotel. And I was on the committee saying no. And on the planning and zoning board, I said, you can't do this because you're going to be taking something away from the town that it has always had. The town formed around this hotel, and you're going to leave us with no hotel in town. And so they conceded to where they would build a 33-room inn. And then, even though I was chairman of the planning and zoning board, and I really, really wanted the hotel saved, and I was fighting it at every turn and bringing up every point I could possibly bring, that's not the job, is to get my way. I'm not the king of the, I was just the chair, right? And so, so it wound up that I had to let the people have their say, and once they agreed to build the hotel, they got a lot more support from the town
and concessions
from the town government. And then, like I said, the inspection that they did was the death toll, because no longer the historic preservation ordinance wouldn't protect it. And the Historic Preservation Board in town agreed and said there's nothing we can do. And so once he had that, he still couldn't make everybody go away, and he couldn't get everybody on board, and he couldn't make these lawsuits stop and all that. So what he agreed to do was to save two of the most famous parts of the hotel. And one would be the lobby entrance, which has one of the box spiral staircases going up, and it was original. It was the original entrance to the hotel. And he would save the carriage porch, which was rounded and had all these windows, and it was beautiful. And his idea was he would cut off this part of the hotel and cut off this part of the hotel, move them to a different part, and then smush them back together. And that was the plan that was approved. It's okay, you can demolish the rest of the hotel. So he starts demolishing the rest of the hotel. And then pretty soon he has the hotel, or the saved part, just there. Now the saved part, I want to point out, doesn't have the Tiffany ballroom. It doesn't have the Starlight ballroom.
Right.
It doesn't have any of that kind of stuff. It's just the lobby and the rooms above it. And he's going to include the one room off to the side is going to make into a parlor, and one into a small meeting room, and that's it. No dining, no anything like that.
Right.
So, but he had permission to do that, and we were watching, and I was taking pictures of it. Every day that there was action going on, I was at Doris Hanson's house on her balcony taking pictures.
She had a great spot to do that.
Yeah, she did.
know.
She really did. And she gave me access. And then, plus, she was so sweet. Doris Hanson, by the way, is going to be in the book that I'm writing right now. She is an amazing woman. Stands all of like 4'10", I think. But anyway, so she would walk around the neighborhood with me. I would drive my car and we'd get out and walk, because they wouldn't allow somebody who didn't live here to be here. But they couldn't stop her from having a guest. So I was able to get pictures all the way through the demolition, and which comes in handy not just for proving my point of saying, see, I told you that this was perfect, and the wood and all that that was salvageable. But he did agree to save that small portion to shut the rest of the preservationists up. And so I say, okay, it wound up being about 4.4% of the hotel. It doesn't include the basement. It was dragged over. The carriage porch is going to be a bone of contention with me, and I will say that it was not cared for. They went to remove it, cut it off, and they had an fire exit stairway hanging over the carriage porch for days. It was swinging back and forth, and I was saying, somebody needs to fix this, it needs to stop. And we had a storm, and that broke off and went through the carriage porch. And they said that it would cause darn too much damage, that we can't move it. Now, some people would speculate that they let that happen because moving the building was one thing. They didn't have to turn it, they just moved it one direction, football fields, a couple of football fields away, whatever. The carriage porch would have had been moved, turned, put on the back of the building, and then made to look like it would fit. That would be very expensive and very difficult to accomplish. So I think that was one of those happy accidents for the developer. So then they just closed in the hotel, and on the outside, it does look very much like the original hotel.
And it's called the Bel Air Inn?
The Belleview Inn.
Belleview Inn.
Yeah. And so, and it's a 33-room hotel. They totally gutted the whole inside. So when you walk in, the floors are original. They still have the box spiral staircase there. But there's no resemblance to the hotel when you walk in the door. And the rooms are all modern and all that. And they.
So I think it's safe to say that you're disappointed in many of the
I think
elements
it's a
of it?
tragic loss.
Okay.
And
more than disappointed than tragic.
It's a tragic loss because it was a unique building that was one of a kind in the entire world. And so to me, it will always be like you chose to kill the unicorn.
Right.
And I will always think that's a tragic loss. But I know that there are people who, disagree. And, think that saving a portion of it and the idea of it is enough. And I'm hoping, that's where I really became dedicated with my books, to where I am saving the original hotel and all of its history, because that hotel, not only was it the start that started bringing rich people to our area and then building homes of their own around it, the 12 cottages that Morton Plant allowed people to build without kitchens, so they would have to take their meals inside the hotel, and then after 4 years the cottages reverted back to the hotel and they could be leased out, which is kind of the beginning of a timeshare. So we had timeshares going on.
Point. Right.
We started all that. Then because Henry's son had an accident, which this is where I talked about the gray area of things, is in some accounts when you read out Henry, Morton's son Henry, the third, or thrice as it was called, he was injured, and some people say it was an automobile accident. Other people say no, it was an accident on the track. They had a racetrack that they had changed it into a bicycle, and they had international races going there. And so I had to choose, because when you have two sources and how you come, so I say the bicycle accident made so much more sense to me, that because the bikes they were using for racing, I mean, we're talking about metal, just cutting to the bone, and those accidents were horrific on that. And the idea that he was carried on a litter into the hotel, where would he have been driving? Would he have been driving? And the cars just weren't that dangerous back then. Right. They were broke down, they weren't reliable, but they, I didn't think that it would be as probable that he could have injured us like that way. So that's the gray area where I choose. And there's another story, Margaret Plant is a great example of that, where she has two histories. In one, it says that she was a servant working in the home of Henry Plant's late in-laws, and because Morton spent the time there, Henry had brought his wife down here, and they had left the son Morton up with the in-laws to be raised, in a better environment. So some people say that he met Margaret because she was a servant working in that home. Other ones say no, she was the sole daughter of royalty in Ireland, and she comes from Belleview, Ireland. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a lot of ballyhoo to me. But when I was writing the book, it's like, okay, how do I take these two things? And that's, again, where I use literary license, and I say, yes, she was royalty in Belleview, but unfortunately, her uncle had wasted away all the family's inheritance, so now her and her mother had to work as servants. But instead of being normal servants working in that house there, they started off doing laundry and stuff like that, but her mother had a way about her, and that way would be to get people to talk and feel better, and then they came to her and they said, can you make this fisticuff fight look like I fell off a horse or something? So they started doing that type of cleanup after people, looking after their reputations and everything. And Margaret kept her ears open, and that's how she learned so much about business and everything. So she was able to, make a life for herself that way. Now that's all.
So you've taken these stories and kind of
made them my own.
Yeah, put a little license in them, but maybe there was some connectivity.
It's like nobody can say it didn't happen.
Right.
Or when Morton Plant built the hospital, that's another influence. There's a reason that Morton Plant Hospital is where it is. It's within walking distance of the hotel.
Correct.
But what's known is that Morton Plant said if the town could raise money to build a hospital in 4 months, which is when the hotel would close for the season, if they could raise that much money, he would donate $100,000 to operate it. All right. Now that's the facts that are known. So what I added in there, that it was a bet with a woman who was a nurse to the doctor who was taking care of people at the hotel. And the nurse made the bet, and she went to him and she wanted him to build the whole hospital, and he says, I'm only here for part of the year. Why doesn't your old town do it? And she said, because you have 5 times more money than the entire town. And so they wind up making a bet. If you can get money from the people in town, that $20,000, by the time the hotel closes, I'll give you 5 times that much to run the place.
Wow.
So it's a bet.
Yeah.
And
Fun.
so it doesn't change really the facts of the situation. And then where I throw the spirits in is that Margaret knows the dirt on everybody in town. So she can absolutely make sure that that money is raised. Right? So that's where I said it. So that's where the fiction and what I have fun with is I don't want you to know when we cross the line between the history and the fiction part of the story.
Fair. Yeah. Tell us about your website, because I know you have a website that talks about your books, and you offered things to people, like saying
absolutely.
that if you want to be included in this book, the first 5 people that
respond. that would be great. Let's see, it's BonSueBooks.com.
Okay. BonSueBooks.com.
Yeah. So
BonSue is one word.
Yeah, BonSue, BonSue, and I capitalized the B, capitalized the S. It's actually a short version of Bonnie Sue. My name is actually a hyphenated name, Bonnie Sue. I've never felt like a Southern Belle. And Bonnie was the name of this, you know how, I don't know if you do this, I totally do this, is that a name has a connotation with whatever person. If I met this person and they have a name that I don't like that person, I will always associate that name with that person. Joffrey is an example of that for me. It's like, I've never met a Joffrey that I really cared for. Sorry if your name's Joffrey. But yeah, so Bonnie was this woman up the street. She had a long crooked nose, a squeaky voice, and she was one of those get off my yard people. And that to me is Bonnie. And so I would go by, the Sue part, or Soupy, my dad used to call me. And I finally just cut out the middleman, and I'm BonSue.
I like it.
Yeah.
Good.
So now if you look me up on the web, actually, if you do BonSue, you're either going to get me or African drum music. Those are the only 2 BonSues that are out there that I know of.
BonSue, you are just full of knowledge and enthusiasm, which is also very fun. This is not heavy on your heart. You've taken it to a whole kind of different level through your stories, and thank you for doing that.
Well, also, if anybody goes on my website, I do, and you're right, I love sharing this information, and I love sharing pictures. So if you go on my website, go on BonSueBooks.com, click on the Belleview Biltmore, you will find a whole timeline of ownership, who had it, in what years, and what did they do, and what did they name the hotel. There's a whole one of activities, what happened during these areas, so the timeline of things. There are pictures from historic pictures and all the way up to when the hotel was closed and demolition, so you can look through all the pictures.
And we're including a few in this video too.
Hopefully,
so that's nice.
Yeah.
So BonSue Brandvik, I always kind of stumble over that last name because it is
Brandvik
unusual.
It's a Norwegian name. My husband is John, and actually we met.
John's been one of your cheerleaders, I know, because I see your books are dedicated to him.
He's wonderful. And John and I actually met when he was down here on spring break. He's from Wisconsin, and he was down here. So I'm like, we're a spring break story that actually worked out,
Right.
But yeah, so he has always been my
part of your team.
Oh yeah, huge.
Well, wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for sharing these stories. We might have you back again to tell about ghost stories. That might be fun if you would do that.
I'd be glad to do that. There's 20 stories, and so they're a lot of fun.
That would be great. Thank you so much, BonSue.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
And thank you for watching this video. We're glad that you're with us today.
2, 3. I wanna wake up in the morning where the orange blossoms grow, where the sun comes peeping in to where I'm sleeping, and the songbirds sing hello. I love the fresh air and the sunshine. They're good for us, you know. So I'll make my home in Florida, where the orange blossoms grow. Where the children used to roam, where the sun comes peeping in, where I'm sleeping at, the songbirds sing hello. I love the fresh air and the sunshine, the good for us, you know. So take me back to Florida, the place that I call home.